Let's talk about how can we interact with the AWS platform to access the services. There are different approaches to interact with the AWS platform and to access the AWS hosted applications. AWS Management Console. This is a web-based interface that allows you to access and manage the AWS services using a web browser. AWS Command Line Interface. This is a command line tool that allows you to interact with AWS services using commands. It can be installed on your local machine and configured with your AWS credentials. AWS SDK. These are software development kits that allow you to interact with AWS services from your application code. AWS provides SDK for several programming languages such as Java, .NET, Python, Ruby, and more. AWS Application Programming Interfaces. AWS services expose the APIs that can be accessed over the internet using standard protocols such as HTTP and HTTPS. Developers can use these APIs to programmatically interact with the AWS services. AWS partner and third-party tools. There are many third-party tools and services available that integrate with the AWS and provides additional functionalities. Some examples include monitoring and management tools, analytic tools, and security tools. Now, let's talk about when you would use one of these approaches versus another. So, first of all, the console is a great method for accessing the AWS services very first time. So, if you want to access a service for the first time, if you want to spin up a virtual server, or maybe you want to test out a new service that AWS just announced, the console is a great way to do this. But for the repeated task, you might want to use either CLI or the SDK. If we require a person to log in into the browser to perform the repeated task, that can be very cumbersome. And if you need to do the repeated task continuously, that becomes a great choice for the automation. And both CLI and SDK can enable that automation. SDK enable the automation of AWS tasks within the custom applications. So if you have a custom application that you are running on the AWS platform and you want to automate the application to interact with the AWS services, the SDK becomes a great choice for that. Now, it's important to note here most of the services and actions can be performed using any of these ways. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule, and we will cover a few of those within this course. But at a high level, just note that for most of the services, you will be able to use either CLI, console, or SDK to perform whatever task you want to perform on those applications.